Welcome to Stakelbeck Tonight. I'm Eric Stakelbeck, and we're cutting through the noise tonight on some of the biggest issues shaping our world and our nation. From Britain's alarming crackdown on free speech, to China propping up Russia while using American technology to fuel China's military rise, to the existential threat radical Islam poses not just to Israel, but to the West itself. The forces at work are more interconnected and more dangerous than most people realize. So how are Western leaders responding? Are we learning the right lessons or repeating the same mistakes? Rod Martin has been tracking all of these global flashpoints and connecting the dots for policymakers and the public alike. Rod is CEO of Martin Capital and host of the Rod Martin Report, where he dissects global politics, U.S. foreign policy, and the cultural and security issues shaping the West. He is also a must-follow on X. Rod, always great to see you. Hey, when I think of the disaster we averted with the election of President Trump last November, what could have been under a Harris-Walz regime, I think of what we're seeing unfolding in Great Britain right now, Rod, where a judge just wished an al-Qaeda terrorist who masterminded the July 7th, 2005 London subway bombings, in which 52 people were killed. The British judge released him back into the public and wished him all the best. Is that kind of a microcosm, Rod, of the state of things, the sorry state of things, and one of the great bastions and beacons, or used to be, of Western civilization, Great Britain?
Well, you're exactly right to connect it to Harris and to the Biden regime, for that matter. This is not about Britain or America or the Anglosphere or the West. This is about socialism. Socialism deifies the state. Socialism makes it the source of all blessings and curses, but it also makes it the source of all truth. And you see that at the end of Orwell's exposition on this, masquerading as the novel 1984, in which, when they're trying to break Winston, at the end of the time, O'Brien has been trying to get him to say 2 + 2 = 5, 2 + 2 = 5. Winston just won't do it. And at the end of that process, O'Brien finally just says 2 + 2 = whatever the party tells you. And that's what we're dealing with here. That's why the minute the socialists came into power in Great Britain, they immediately started arresting people for posting memes. Great Britain is now arresting 30 citizens a day for posting opinions online. There was one today where the guy was arrested because he made a social media user, and I'm quoting the police, anxious. I mean, I don't post anything that isn't intended to make people feel anxious, for heaven's sake. I mean, it's just daylight and dark from the First Amendment. But socialism must do this because it believes that it alone has the answers, that you really don't have a say, and that their technocracy, their elite, their effectively aristocracy, has the absolute right not only to determine right and wrong, but to determine reality, which you see with the transgender movement and everything they do. So, yes, this is exactly what we should have expected from a socialist win in Great Britain, and it's exactly what we got. And if Harris had won this election, we already saw what Joe Biden was doing to suppress any dissent in this country. It would have gone on steroids if Kamala had won.
Yeah, and more evidence, Rod, that Biden and his administration were intentionally targeting Christians in particular. Hey, you mentioned transgenderism. A British comedian recently stepped off a plane and was accosted by 4 armed police officers over tweets he had made criticizing transgenderism. Really a sorry state of affairs in Great Britain, to say the least. What's the shelf life of this regime there, Rod? Look, Keir Starmer, a very weak, a craven leader. Do you get any sense? I know there's a big rally coming up this Saturday, September 13th, basically a pro-England, pro-Britain, pro-sanity rally in London. Do you get the sense that the people of the UK are getting fed up? We could see a turnaround there. Could this even be leading towards some more hostile actions in the streets? I mean, we have a radical Islamic population exploding there, no pun intended. We have people getting fed up. Where do you see this all heading, perhaps, in Great Britain?
Well, I think it's unfortunate for the British that they don't have to have an election until 2029. It is necessary that this regime be removed from power. The king needs to step in and dissolve parliament, but he's not going to do that, most likely, because his affinity is for the left and always has been. I am a former officer of the Conservative Party in the UK. I was the political officer of the Cambridge University Conservative Association when I was over there, and I love the oldest party in the world. But in power, they governed exactly as their opponents are now. And so, what's the difference? If there's really not any difference practically between the Tories and Labor, then you got to have another option. And that's exactly what's happening. It wouldn't work in the United States the same way because we have a two-party system that is much, much more enshrined into law than most people understand. But in Great Britain, another party is a very real and powerful possibility. And Nigel Farage is leading that with Reform UK. I suspect if we had an election anytime soon, Nigel would have an overwhelming majority in the new House of Commons, and all of this would stop.
Wow, incredible. Keeping a close eye on Farage for sure. About a minute left, Rod, then we'll bring you right back. Outside of Nigel Farage, any hope for Great Britain? I guess there's always hope, but it seems like the door is closing here as that Muslim population grows and the left continues to entrench itself.
The British are a very polite and reserved people, but you can't push them too far. And people all over the world for centuries have learned that lesson. This is going to get out of hand if something doesn't give. And the protests you mentioned are only going to intensify. There is very likely to be violence, and that needs to be avoided. But it can't be avoided when you have Muslim rape gangs marauding across Britain and a government that won't do anything to stop it.
Yeah, and it will actually imprison the people criticizing those same rape gangs. It's a world turned upside down right now. But, Rod, we're so glad we have you here with us to make sense of it. Coming up, more with Rod Martin. Russia, China working together against American interests. You'll want to hear this. More with Rod Martin after the break. Stick around. Welcome back to Stakelbeck Tonight. We're talking to Rod Martin, CEO of Martin Capital, host of the Rod Martin Report. Folks, be sure to follow Rod on X for great updates every single day on everything happening in the world and how it affects you. Speaking of which, Rod, Russia, it seems that Russian economy is showing strain right now. President Trump's pressure is working. You've described it as a Potemkin economy. Tell us what that means and why Vladimir Putin's regime could be in some trouble right now, again, economically.
Well, we already learned that they have a Potemkin military, and that's just plain as day. The people who want to deny that are just ignoring reality. Russia was supposed to take Kiev in about 3 days, a week at the outside. Here we are 3.5 years later, and they are further from Kiev than they were. The rate of attrition is just awful, and that feeds back into the economy. Putin needs $10 billion in cold, hard cash per month to be able to keep this war machine fighting. And that's assuming that you have warm bodies to go do that fighting. They don't have the money. And they've been able to sustain it so far through a predatory relationship with China, the predator being China. China is forcing them to sell their energy to them at a steep discount to market price. If China was serious about helping Russia, they certainly would not do that. India won't buy it from them on any better terms for Russia. So that's keeping Putin alive, but it's predatory beyond words. And China is increasingly encroaching on Siberia and other parts of the Russian Far East and so forth. They would carve Russia up tomorrow if they could. So bring in Trump. All of a sudden, we're talking about significantly greater military pressure, for Ukraine, these new Iran missiles that we're shipping over there imminently are a really big deal. Gives Ukraine a tremendous long-range strike capability that's very cheap and very effective. But also these secondary sanctions, where we start going after the countries that are Putin's customers. If you make it very hard for them to buy the oil, you shut off the tap on Putin's war machine because he simply can't pay for it. And Trump's pressure is working, despite another Potemkin event, the military parade in Beijing, which is all for show. And it might work on an Obama or a Biden or even a Bush, but it isn't working on Donald Trump.
Yeah, it seems these American adversaries are pooling their resources, Rod. We saw last week the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in China, including China, Russia, Iran, Turkey. How concerned should we be about that gathering, its ramifications, and the chess pieces moving where, again, these American adversaries are kind of gathering together to oppose President Trump?
We should be aware, but we should not be overly concerned. I mean, what are they going to do? The truth of the matter is, for all this talk of their alliance to the end with Iran, Russia and China have completely refused to sell Iran modern fighter planes all these decades. They're still, well, I was going to say they're still flying, but actually the Israelis took care of that problem for us. They were flying F-14s that we sold them in the 70s. That's their most advanced fighters. Their mainstay are fighters that were state-of-the-art in 1960, or 65. Now, that being the case, how serious is this alliance with China? And that's how China treats its allies in general. They're not your friend, and nobody is dumb enough to think they're your friend. So Modi goes to Beijing. He's making a show because he's mad at Trump because of the secondary tariffs. I get it. I mean, he'd probably be less mad if we'd hit China too. But the China negotiations are at a really crucial point, and Trump didn't want to attack that immediately. Nevertheless, Modi's there, but Modi's not going to take India into a real alliance with China. China invades India periodically. They're existential threats to India. And likewise, Putin knows that she is his enemy. There's no getting around it. So I don't think we need to be overly concerned about this. And no, I don't think we're driving them together. I think what's really happening is we're putting enough carrot and stick pressure on Putin that at some point it breaks and we actually get to a peace deal.
Yeah, Rod, great breakdown. Hey, U.S. companies, speaking of China, like Apple, Google, and Microsoft are accused of helping build China's surveillance state and military tech. How significant is this threat to U.S. national security? Some of our biggest companies working with the communist Chinese.
It's highly significant, and my old friend Peter Thiel has talked about this off and on for years. A lot of American technology companies are completely in bed with China, and part of that is the attitude that prevailed in this country until about halfway through Trump's first term, that China's not our enemy. They don't want to hurt us. We're friends. This is great. They're growing. We're going to make all this money in China. Well, turns out consumer spending in China per capita is about half of what it is in the rest of the industrialized world. So yes, there's money to be made, but not like they thought. And moreover, China is our enemy. And they've been very clear about it. And they're clear about it all day, every day. This is a country that actually threatens to nuke Los Angeles periodically. This is a country that is developing an enormous new nuclear arsenal to destabilize the existing balance of power that makes mutual assured destruction work. And it's one of the reasons that Trump is so serious about deploying Golden Dome quickly. These are not our friends. So why is Microsoft building their surveillance state? Why is Google up to its eyeballs in that? That has to be called out, and this administration is calling it out.
Yeah, amazing. We live in amazing times, perilous times, but amazing times, no doubt. Follow Rod, folks, on X, across social media. We're talking about the Trump doctrine abroad. What about the Trump doctrine here at home? The return of law and order. Imagine that. More with Rod Martin after the break. Don't move. back to Stakelbeck Tonight. We're talking to Rod Martin, CEO of Martin Capital, host of the Rod Martin Report. Be sure to follow him on X, folks. He is a must-follow on that platform. Rod, you have compared President Trump's talk of deploying the National Guard to crime-ridden cities like Chicago to Little Rock and President Eisenhower deploying the National Guard there. Break that down for us a bit, how there is a historical precedent here.
Well, there's enormous historical precedent here. And it's not just Eisenhower. It's JFK. It's LBJ. It's Richard Nixon. It's Ronald Reagan. It's George Bush. We've done this over and over again. One of the more notable situations, of course, being the 1992 Los Angeles riots, which are exactly analogous to what Trump did in Los Angeles with the anti-ICE riots. But the Eisenhower example is actually spot on for what we're talking about in Chicago and New Orleans and other cities that are just awash in crime. It's absolutely absurd that Chicago would have 5 murders just over Labor Day weekend, that they would have 54 shootings in 2 days. This is not okay. And the Democrats have been running those cities for over a century. The blood is on their hands. We know that you can get it under control because of what just happened in Washington. In 2 weeks' time, they had 1 murder. In 2 weeks' time, they cut the violent crime rate in half. And you got to understand, the National Guard can't arrest. All they can do is detain you until the police come and determine if there's probable cause for an arrest, and then they do their thing. So the Guard is tremendous backup, but its deployment does not violate the Posse Comitatus Act. And that's exactly why Dwight Eisenhower felt free to send in the 101st Airborne and federalize the Arkansas National Guard for the purpose of escorting 9 black students into Little Rock Central High in 1957, just 3 years after the Brown versus Board of Education ruling at the Supreme Court. And not only did they escort the kids in, they stayed. And we federally occupied Little Rock for about 8 months. So don't tell me there's no precedent here. I literally grew up in Arkansas. All we heard was how Eisenhower had been this incredible hero. They never bothered to mention he was a Republican, of course. They didn't say a lot about Faubus being a Democrat, but they absolutely lionized Eisenhower. And Trump is right to get these cities under control so innocent children can play in their yards and innocent men and women can come and go to work and not live in fear.
I guess the big question, Rod, is why would the left oppose this? Because Democrats are howling and gnashing their teeth about the deployment in D.C. and talk of similar deployments in Chicago, New York City, et cetera. Who in their right mind would oppose this? As you said, making our streets and our cities safer for our children.
Well, the Democrats have presided over this debacle. So at its most basic level, the last thing they want is for Donald Trump to show how needless all these deaths have been. You know, you have plenty of statistics to show that Chicago in particular has pretty consistently been more dangerous, in terms of loss of human life over the last 25 years than Baghdad. And there's just no excuse for it. It's just absurd. So when Donald Trump comes in and does some common sense things to get these matters under control, it makes these Democrats look terrible and it endangers their reelection. That's really what's happening. Yeah. At a broader level, it benefits the left to let crime run wild because it creates a mass opinion that we must do something, and that allows them to grow big government. What they don't want is for Donald Trump to do any of that in a way that might harm their political prospects. And I just want to say one last thing there. Donald Trump is not expanding the power of the federal government. Donald Trump is using the power of federal government in the manner that it has been used consistently by president after president for the purpose of solving this violent crime problem, not for anything else, and certainly not violative of the Posse Comitatus Act.
Yeah, and Democrats are on the wrong side again, Rod, of every single issue, including Kilmar Albrego Garcia, the MS-13 gang member who was described in the mainstream media and by Democrats as a Maryland father. Well, he's now being deported finally. Can you talk about the importance of the Trump administration sticking to its guns here and showing him out of the country? Again, despite the howls of the left.
Well, he absolutely is a Maryland father. And by Maryland father, we mean a man who was turned into the police for wife beating twice, a man who was involved in human trafficking. That's his indictment in Tennessee. A man who's a member of MS-13, according to an immigration court's finding. So, yes, Maryland father, absolutely. And this is who the Democrats uphold as exemplars of American virtue. No, he's a gangbanging, wife-beating, human trafficking, illegal alien who never had a right to be here in the first place, already had an active deportation order against him, and he really ought to be in CCOT for the rest of his life in El Salvador. But they gave him an opportunity to go to just about any country he picked. He wanted to avoid that, so he kept saying, "Oh, I'm under threat in those places." Those places haven't even heard of you, man. Yeah. So now they're going to send him to Eswatini, which is the former Swaziland in southern Africa, and it's really pretty hilarious. But yes, this is who they stand up for. They wanted to flood the border. They can't allow anything that closes that border, because that border invasion floods blue states with new electoral votes and new House seats. That's what this is about. And it'll ultimately get to the point where these people are actually directly voting. And of course, many of them are now. But that's the game. And if they have to die on the hill of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, they're clearly willing to do it.
Yeah, and that's why the border miracle under President Trump is so important. We've never seen a more secure southern border. Rod, you've been documenting that as well. Great work as always, my friend. Folks, be sure to follow him on X. Check him out on the Rod Martin Report. Rod, great stuff. God bless, my friend. We'll see you again soon. And coming up after the break, my final thoughts on sanity, how the United States may be the lone beacon of that in the Western world right now. Stick around. Welcome back to Stakelbeck Tonight, folks. As we wrap up here, Rod Martin and I were talking about the madness that has gripped much of the West, including Great Britain, of course. While here in America, we're moving back towards sanity, faith, family, and freedom, and we need to remain steadfast in that despite the world descending into chaos. I think of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. We're doing the right thing here in America to stand with the Lord, to turn back to freedom, to sanity. The Trump administration is doing the right thing as well, so we need to stay the course. Speaking of which, our good friend Rabbi Jonathan Cahn is here tomorrow night. Brand new must-read book, folks, breaking down all of these spiritual battles we're locked in right now. You won't want to miss it. Until then, God bless you. We'll see you soon.